Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into a few, well, fascinating and maybe slightly concerning things happening across Europe.
Yeah, trying to piece together some news items that look separate at first glance.
Exactly. We've got this YouTube transcript from Lighthouse TV's Shang 3, and our mission really is to pull out the key insights.
Particularly looking at that Dutch heritage site, the Zandseeschans.
Right, and the digital euro, the CBDC, which seems to be speeding up.
And also, where did all that COVID-19 recovery fund money actually go? It's a huge amount.
Nearly 800 billion euros. So yeah, get ready for maybe some aha moments as we try to connect the dots for you.
It's interesting, isn't it, how these specific local issues can sometimes act like a lens.
A lens, how so?
Well, they magnify these bigger European trends. You look at heritage, money, government through these examples.
And you start to see the bigger picture, the direction things are moving.
Precisely. And the tensions, the push and pull shaping Europe's future.
Okay, so let's start with the Zandseeschans. Beautiful place, windmills, clogs, attracts millions.
A classic Dutch scene. But not all is calm behind the windmills.
No. There's this proposal from the Vereniging des Molen, that's the Windmill Association, for mandatory entrance tickets, and a new business model to, well, secure their finances.
Okay, so needing money. But that's caused some backlash.
Yeah, big concerns from members. People like Philip Hofmeister, they're worried it'll just kill the soul of the place.
Commercializing it too much.
Yeah.
Losing the authenticity.
That's the fear. And limiting the freedom for the traditional crafts that still happen there.
And there's a specific craft under threat, isn't there? A paint mill.
The last operational paint mill in the world, apparently. Run by the Kempenaar family for 44 years, they could be displaced.
Wow. So it's heritage versus tourism pressure versus maybe the local council's budget needs.
It looks like it. So what does this actually mean for trying to keep heritage real when you've got hordes of tourists?
It's that classic tension, isn't it? We see it everywhere. How do you preserve these special places, often kept alive by families like the Kempenaars?
Right, people pouring their lives into it.
And balance that with the money side. Mass tourism, needing funds for upkeep.
And the local municipality wanting a piece of the pie, perhaps?
That adds another layer, absolutely. The risk is that generating income starts to overshadow the actual cultural value, the thing that makes Zandseeschans special in the first place.
And according to Hofmeister, it's not just about balancing the books. He thinks it's becoming a theme park.
Losing its realness.
Yeah, and potentially kicking out the Kempenaars. They supply pigments to huge museums, the Mauritshuis Rembrandt House.
That really drives home what's at stake. It's not just pretty buildings. It's living history, industrial history.
So who gets to decide? That's the big question, isn't it?
Exactly. Is it the local government needing cash? The heritage groups focus on preservation? Businesses seeing tourist euros, or the local people whose identity is tied to the place.
And it's weird that the Windmill Association itself is pushing this plan that its members hate.
That is quite telling, yes. It suggests maybe conflicting priorities even within the organization meant to protect the site.
And Hofmeister points out how impractical the plan sounds, too. Putting a fence around a public area with a bike path kids use for school.
A fence. And charging entry.
Yeah, he calls it political air cycling. Bit dry, but you get the point.
It does sound difficult to implement, let's say.
And get this, to make the plan work financially, they need to triple the paying visitors, from 600,000 to 1.8 million.
Triple? But isn't over-tourism already a problem they say they want to fix?
Exactly. It seems completely backward. How does tripling visitors help with overcrowding or preserving authenticity?
It really doesn't add up, does it? It suggests maybe the stated goal of preservation isn't quite aligned with the economic thinking behind it.
Makes you wonder if they've really looked at other ways to fund it, more sustainable ways.
You'd hope so.
Hofmeister is pushing a petition, reddesandsemmelens.nl, Save Zen Windmills, and there's a meeting coming up for members to object.
Feels like a real grassroots pushback.
Yeah, trying to protect this unique spot from what they see as just misguided commercialization.
A kind of David versus Goliath feel. Local advocates against potentially bigger economic forces. It would be really interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Will their voices be heard?
We'll have to wait and see. Okay, let's shift gears. The digital euro. The CBDC.
Ah, yes. The European Central Bank seems to be hitting the accelerator on that one.
They're talking October this year for the launch. which feels fast, especially with public skepticism kind of growing.
And financial journalist Arno Wellens has some thoughts on why the rush.
He links it to the U.S., actually, to Trump's views on CBDCs and this idea of a U.S. stablecoin instead.
So stablecoin being a crypto pegged to something like the dollar, yeah.
Yeah.
Less centrally controlled than a CBDC.
So we need to look at the implications, both the online version, which connects to the digital identity wallet.
The NL wallet here in the Netherlands, eventually, maybe Q3 2026.
Right. And this offline version would seem surprisingly close.
And Wellens connects this whole digital currency push to something else. Negative interest rates.
Yes. His idea is that central banks want to be able to use negative rates without everyone just rushing to withdraw cash. He calls it a financial fence.
A financial fence. That's a strong image. What could that mean for, well, for your financial freedom and privacy?
Big questions.
Wellens definitely brings a critical eye here. He's suggesting the ECB's hurry might not just be about Europe's economy.
But about keeping up with the Joneses, or rather, the U.S.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
If the U.S. under Trump is wary of a full CBDC and leans towards a stablecoin, maybe the ECB feels pressure to plant their flag first.
Sort of digital currency race.
It has that feel. Wellens notes Trump seems doubtful about a U.S. CBDC, asking what's really in it for ordinary people.
And suggesting maybe a stablecoin is the way to go instead.
Which the ECB could see as a challenge, pushing them to get their digital euro out the door faster.
So the online versus the offline version, that distinction is key, you're saying?
Absolutely critical, according to Wellens. The online one, linked to that digital ID.
That's the one that potentially gives the central bank visibility into your holdings.
Theoretically, yes. And that visibility is what could enable negative interest rates to actually stick, because you can't just flee to cash quite so easily.
Which naturally makes people worry about privacy and control.
Understandably so.
And the offline one. Wellens compares it to the Dutch OV chip card, the public transport card.
Like a reloadable travel card, yeah. Simple, contactless.
And that's the one possibly launching in October. So soon.
That's the suggestion. Wellens thinks it might be a strategy, you know. Introduce a digital form that seems less threatening first.
Like a stepping stone. Get people used to the idea before the full online ID-linked version rolls out.
That seems to be his interpretation. An initial, less intrusive step.
And that financial fence idea really sticks.
It does. He's arguing a core reason for the digital euro is to stop people pulling money out if, say, interest rates go negative.
To stop a run on cash, essentially.
Because negative rates are seen by some economists as a tool they need in a crisis to make people spend, not hoard.
But Wellens points out it fundamentally changes saving. It could just eat away at your money over time.
And he says the ECB's own report from 2020 basically admitted this, that enabling negative rates without causing a flight to cash was a motivation.
He even remembers back in 2016 when rates just dipped slightly below zero, banks started moving towards holding more physical cash.
Shows the natural reaction, doesn't it? So imagine if rates went properly negative. Like -5%, as he speculates, might happen someday.
People would definitely react, so that's where the freedom and privacy worries really hit home.
Hugely pertinent. A digital euro tied to ID could give central banks, well, unprecedented insight and potentially control.
Tracking transactions, applying rates directly, it's a big shift from cash in your pocket.
A very significant shift in that citizen-money relationship.
Wellens also flags those promises. We heard cash will always be there, digital money won't be programmable.
Meaning you couldn't be restricted on where or how you spend it.
Right. But he feels the current push, especially linking it to ID, kind of goes against those promises.
Raising the possibility of governments tracking, maybe even controlling spending based on policies.
Yeah, he paints a picture of a potential digital financial prison. It's quite stark.
And he asks a really simple, important question. What's the actual benefit for the average person?
Compared to payment systems we already have or this new Wero platform coming.
His answer is basically nothing, unless the goal is more central bank control.
Okay, let's move to the third piece. That massive COVID recovery fund, Next Generation EU, nearly 800 billion euros.
And it's come under fire from the European Court of Auditors. Quite heavily, it seems.
Yeah, Lighthouse TV's David Borstra broke down their report. It uses terms like failing supervision.
Failing supervision, that's blunt.
It is, and raises huge questions about where all that taxpayer money actually went.
What were the main criticisms?
Things like funding wasn't linked to actual costs, Payments were tied to hitting milestones, not necessarily results.
Milestones rather than results. That sounds a bit vague.
And a lack of clarity on who ultimately got the money, the end beneficiaries.
That's fundamental transparency, isn't it? Knowing where public money ends up.
And here's a kicker. Borstra highlights arguments that the fund's main goals, the green transition, the digital transition, were decided before COVID hit.
Before. So the pandemic wasn't the original reason for setting those priorities.
That's the suggestion. Which makes you ask, what was the real purpose of these corona billions? And did they actually help with the pandemic recovery?
So the auditor's report really does paint a pretty worrying picture of financial management and oversight at the EU level.
Borstra's analysis underscores these big gaps in how the money was given out and tracked.
The fact that funding wasn't tied to actual pandemic costs, but to these milestones. It does make you wonder if the money achieved what it was supposedly for.
That failing supervision finding and not knowing the end beneficiaries, that's deeply troubling for such a huge amount of money.
Especially when it's taxpayer money from all across Europe.
And this idea that the green and digital goals came first.
That's really striking. Were the corona billions a genuine response to the crisis? Or more like a vehicle to push through an existing agenda?
Using the pandemic as cover, almost.
It raises that question. And Arno Wellens actually backs this up too. He says there was already talk in EU circles before the pandemic about needing a big EU loan program for green and digital stuff.
Really? He mentioned that specifically.
Yes, Wellens recalls giving a speech back in 2017 about needing common EU financial tools. And he points to a specific announcement in December 2019.
December 2019, that's before COVID really kicked off in Europe in early 2020.
Exactly, an announcement about Eurobonds specifically for the digital transition.
Wow. The timing certainly suggests the pandemic might have been a convenient reason for a plan already brewing.
It does challenge the main story we were told about the fund, doesn't it? If the priorities were set beforehand.
Were the funds really aimed at actual pandemic relief, or just channeled towards these other goals?
And the auditors finding no clear link between spending and actual pandemic costs just adds fuel to that skepticism. It needs a closer look.
The Court of Auditors also pointed out other worrying things, like countries didn't strictly have to follow all the rules to get paid.
Really, compliance wasn't a prerequisite.
Apparently not strictly, and the European Commission relied a lot on national systems to catch problems.
Even though they knew those national systems had flaws.
Yes. And it seems the Commission couldn't easily claw back money if procurement rules were broken, unless it was a serious irregularity.
Sounds like a potential loophole for misuse, given the sums involved.
Definitely seems possible.
And the report mentioned loans too, right?
Mm-hmm.
A big chunk was loans, not grants.
That's right, which means future EU budgets are going to be squeezed. The debt has to be repaid eventually.
Plus the interest costs, as the EU borrowed all that money itself. So it wasn't exactly free money.
No, it comes with future liabilities for member states, for taxpayers.
Yet despite all these quite serious findings from the auditors, Wellens says the reaction in Europe has been pretty muted.
Uproar is virtually zero, is how he put it.
He sees a pattern, doesn't he? Big EU funding packages coming along over the years, different justifications.
Leading him to wonder if a main goal is often just shifting wealth, maybe from northern to southern Europe, under various policy labels.
The lack of a big public or political reaction to such a critical report on 800 billion euros, that is concerning.
It makes you think about accountability, doesn't it? How much real scrutiny is there?
And how much are European citizens actually aware of these massive financial decisions that ultimately affect them?
Okay, so we've dug into these three things. Zonsischans, the digital euro speeding up, the questions around the recovery fund seem separate.
But you start to see the threads connecting them, don't you?
Yeah, threads around control, priorities, that balance between progress and, well, preservation.
The Zonsischans story really shows that tension. Economic pressure versus protecting cultural heritage.
And the digital euro. Huge questions about financial control, personal freedom in this digital world.
While the Recovery Fund critique highlights just how complex and, frankly, potentially flawed these huge European projects can be. Governance, accountability, big issues.
It feels like these examples point to broader shifts happening in Europe.
I think so.
Oh.
The growing power of economics over culture, the definite push towards more digital financial control, and these ongoing struggles with transparency and accountability in EU governance.
Understanding how these connect seems pretty crucial for figuring out where Europe's heading.
Absolutely crucial for all of us navigating the future here.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Thinking about all this, what does progress actually mean for Europe's future?
Mm, that's a deep one.
Are we genuinely moving towards more efficiency, more innovation? Or maybe are we accidentally giving up important bits of our culture, our identity, even our individual freedoms along the way?
Yeah. Efficiency and innovation versus identity and freedom. Is it a trade-off? Does it have to be?
Something to definitely mull over as you go about your day.